She was cast out for loving what the pack feared most. The cabin smelled of pine ash and dying embers. Ilara's hands trembled as she wrapped the wolf's ribs in linen soaked with yarrow and moonflower, herbs her grandmother had taught her to harvest under the silver eye of the goddess. The creature's breathing came shallow, labored, each exhale a rattle of pain. His fur was dark as midnight, matted with blood that belonged to no ordinary wound. They said he was diseased, cursed, a rogue sent from the northern territories to poison the bloodlines of the southern packs. They were wrong. She had seen the truth in his eyes when he stumbled to her door 3 nights ago, half-starved and burning with fever. There was no madness there, only desperation and something older. Something that called to the strange gift buried in her own chest, the one she'd learned long ago to hide. The fire crackled low in the hearth. Ilara moved between the wolf and the window, watching the darkness beyond the glass. The forest was silent in a way that made her skin prickle. Predatory silence, the kind that meant hunters were close. "Easy," she whispered, pressing cool water to the wolf's muzzle. "They won't find you here." But even as she spoke the words, she knew they were a lie wrapped in prayer. The cabin had belonged to her mother, a place tucked so far into the winterwood that the pack rarely ventured past the old stone marker. Ilara had come here after they cast her out from the village, after they discovered her gift. A pathfinder. They called it in the old languages. One who could sense the true nature of souls, who could taste magic in the air like copper and starlight. Dangerous, unreliable, a liability. Her mother had been the same. That's why they'd exiled her too, decades before. That's why Ilara had grown up on the edge of 2 worlds, neither fully pack nor fully free. The wolf's fever had begun to break around midnight. She'd felt it the moment his temperature shifted, felt the change ripple through something deeper than flesh. That was when she understood. This was no ordinary rogue. The power thrumming beneath his skin was ancient, layered like sediment, like the weight of centuries compressed into living muscle and bone. A king's power. She'd heard the stories. They whispered them during the dark months when the hunters gathered. An alpha king from the north, cursed by a shaman's spite, forced to walk the earth in wolf form, unable to shift back until a debt was paid or a wound was healed. Some said he'd killed an innocent. Others claimed he'd refused to kill when ordered. The pack's memory was a fickle thing. It rewrote itself with each telling. What mattered now was the fever breaking. What mattered was the way his breathing eased as her hands worked over him, pulling the sickness out of his blood and into the earth beneath the cabin's foundation. A gift that wasn't supposed to exist. A healing that the Pack Council had declared witchcraft. The sound came just before dawn. The smell of torches and gasoline, the thunder of horses, the howls of a hunting pack in full voice. Ilara's breath caught. She moved to the window and saw them. 20 riders at least, carrying brands and fuel cans, their faces twisted with the righteous certainty of men who believed they were doing holy work. The Alpha King shifted then, for the first time since arriving. His dark eyes opened, full consciousness returning, and in them she saw recognition, gratitude, and something else. Resignation. He knew what was coming. "Hide," he growled, his voice rough from disuse, from suffering. "There's a cave system beneath this place. The earth will shield you from their sight." "I'm not leaving you," Ilara said. "You have to. If they find you here with me..." "Then they burn it all," she finished. Her voice was steady, though her hands shook. "They burn it all anyway." The first torch hit the eastern wall. The wood caught immediately, hungry and bright, sending smoke curling up into the pre-dawn darkness. Through the window, she could see their faces now. Hunters from the southern territories. Men she'd known her entire life. Men who'd watched her mother die in exile. Men who believed mercy was weakness and compassion was treason. The Alpha King rose to his feet, still half wolf, half man, caught between forms, caught between worlds, just like her. His eyes met hers across the burning cabin, and in that moment, something shifted in the universe. A recognition older than language, deeper than blood. "What is your name?" he asked. "Ilara." "Then remember, Ilara of the Winterwood, they burned your sanctuary, but they cannot burn what you carry inside. Your gift, it's not a curse, it's a pathway." He moved toward the window, toward the flames. And every pathway leads somewhere. The cabin groaned. The roof began to collapse, sparks rising like dying stars. She should have been afraid. Instead, she felt the strange calm of those who have nothing left to lose, nothing left to hide. Outside, the hunting party emerged from the smoke and froze. Behind them, from the northern approach where no one had been standing moments before, came an army. Wolves the size of mountains, warriors in armor that caught the firelight like mirrors, and at their center, a man on horseback with eyes that held the cold fury of a winter storm. The Alpha King had arrived, and he was not alone. The southern hunters scattered like sparrows fleeing a hawk's shadow. Ilara stood in the doorway of her burning cabin, watching the Alpha King's army move through the Winterwood with the precision of a ritual long rehearsed. The wolves, true wolves, massive and silver-furred, surrounded the panicked riders with predatory grace. No violence came, not yet. The Alpha King had raised a hand from his horse, and his forces had obeyed with the instantaneous discipline of warriors bound by something deeper than fear. Command, ancient command, the kind that moved through blood and bone. The man on horseback was different from the creature she'd nursed through fever. This version was fully human, fully present, fully terrible in the way old kings are terrible. He wore armor of darkened steel and a cloak that seemed woven from starlight and shadow. His face was sharp as a blade, high cheekbones, a jaw like iron, and eyes that held the weight of centuries. Where the wolf had been desperate, this man was composed, lethal, complete. He dismounted with the grace of something that had walked the earth since the world was young. "Ilara," he said, and his voice was different too, deeper, resonant, carrying the echo of that ancient power. "Come." She moved toward him without thinking, drawn by the same thread that had recognized him in wolf form. Her body understood before her mind could question. This was the nature of the Pathfinder gift. To see the truth beneath the skin, to navigate the invisible roads that connected soul to soul. Behind her, the cabin collapsed into itself. The hunters, those who hadn't fled into the darkness, stood frozen, watching the Alpha King regard Ilara as though she were the only person in the world. "You sheltered me," he said, not a question. "You were dying." "Yes." He reached out, and his fingers were warm against her cheek. "And you healed me, even knowing what I was, even knowing what it would cost you." "They were going to burn it anyway," she said quietly. "I just didn't know about the army." A sound came from him, not quite a laugh, but something close, something that held both sorrow and gratitude. "There is no army," he said. "Not yet. These are my personal guard, called from the northern territories when I did not return. They came searching for their king, and they found a miracle instead." He turned to face the terrified hunters, and his expression hardened into something ancient and implacable. "You were burning a healer," he said, his voice cutting through the smoke like a blade through silk. "You were burning an innocent because your fear tasted better than your conscience." He paused, letting the words settle. "In the old laws, the true laws before your council rewrote them, this is punishable by exile, by loss of rank, by the severance of pack bonds." One of the hunters stepped forward, a broad-faced man Ilara recognized as Gareth, the village captain. "She harbored a diseased creature, my lord. The council ordered—" "I do not care what your council ordered," the Alpha King interrupted. His voice was quiet now, which made it somehow more devastating. I was that diseased creature. I came here half mad with fever and curse, and this woman gave me shelter instead of fear. She used her gift, a gift your people have criminalized, hunted, erased from your bloodlines, to save a stranger. He gestured back toward Ilara. That is not treason. That is not witchcraft. That is the oldest magic there is. Mercy. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine smoke and something older, something lunar. Ilara felt it move through her, a tide of power that wasn't hers, but which recognized her anyway, the Alpha King's magic, acknowledging the space she'd healed in his blood. "What is your name?" she heard herself ask. He turned back to her, and there was something almost sad in his expression. "Kieran. I was known as Kieran before the curse took hold. I am known by many names now, some of them not fit for gentle ears." He reached out and took her hand. "But to you, I would like to be simply Kieran, the man whose life you saved when you had every reason to let him die." Behind them, the Alpha King's guards began to move the hunters back toward their horses with calm, inexorable purpose, not cruel, but final. The judgment had been rendered. Ilara squeezed Kieran's hand, feeling the warmth of his palm, the steadiness of his pulse. "Your fever broke around midnight," she said. "I felt it happen. I felt the curse beginning to lift." "I know." His eyes held hers. "I felt you too. The moment you touched my wound, I felt a door opening in my blood, a pathway forward." He paused. "My shaman said the curse could only be broken by one who saw my true nature without flinching, one whose gift matched the depth of my transgression." "What did you do?" Ilara asked. "What transgression warranted this?" Kieran's jaw tightened. "I refused to execute a prisoner, a young woman from a conquered territory. My own council deemed her a threat, ordered me to end her life as a message." He looked away. "I could not. So they cursed me, bound me into wolf form until I could find one who would see mercy in me and accept the weight of that sight." The implications rippled through Ilara like concentric circles in still water. "And now?" "Now," Kieran said, turning back to her with something like wonder in his eyes. "I stand in your world, in the shape you knew first, and I ask, will you come north with me? Will you leave this burned place and walk the roads of my territory, where your gift is not a crime, but a crown?" The cabin burned behind them. The hunters retreated into the pre-dawn darkness, and Ilara, for the first time in her life, felt the solid ground of choice beneath her feet. The northern road was carved from starlight and stone. That was the only way Ilara could describe it as she rode beside Kieran, the Alpha King's guard forming a protective crescent around them. The winterwood gave way to higher territory, mountains that seemed to pierce the underbelly of the sky itself, their peaks crowned with snow that never melted. The air was different here, thinner, charged with the kind of magic that made her skin prickle and her Pathfinder gift sing in response. Kieran rode in silence most of the time, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was the silence of someone who had learned to listen to the world in its true language, the rustle of wind through bare branches, the distant howl of wolves in the high passes, the subtle shift of magic that moved beneath the earth like blood through veins. "Tell me about your mother," he said on the third day as they camped in a valley between two peaks. The fire was small and controlled, the way Kieran's people built their flames, efficient, purposeful, never wasteful. "She was a Pathfinder too," Ilara said, running her fingers along the edge of a piece of flatbread. "My grandmother taught her the healing arts, but the pack feared what she could see. They said she was reading their thoughts without permission, that her gift was a violation of privacy and dignity." She paused. "They exiled her before I was born. She lived in the cabin you found me in, lived alone for 30 years, and I only got to know her for the last 5 years of her life." Kieran was quiet for a long moment. "And they did the same to you?" Not quite. I hid it for longer. But yes, eventually they discovered what I was, and they removed me from the village. She looked up at him. I thought I was broken. I thought my gift was a curse, just like they said. I didn't understand that what I could see, the truth in people, was something precious. It is precious, Kieran said, and there was something fierce in his voice. It is the rarest gift. Do you know how many alphas go their entire lives without ever truly being seen? Without anyone daring to look beneath the armor? He leaned forward. You saw me, Alara, when I was nothing but fever and desperation and the weight of a curse I couldn't break. You saw that I was still capable of being saved, that I was worth saving. She felt something shift in her chest, something like recognition, but deeper. The Pathfinder gift was stirring again, reaching out toward him with that strange pull she'd felt since his human form emerged from the smoke of her burning cabin. Kieran, she said quietly, why did you refuse to execute that prisoner? That was the true beginning of the curse, wasn't it? He was silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he rose and moved to the edge of the firelight, staring out into the darkness beyond. Because I saw her, he finally said, and when I saw her, truly saw her the way you see, I recognized that executing her was not justice. It was cruelty, masquerading as order. He turned back to face Alara. Your gift, your Pathfinder sight, it's not just about seeing the truth in people. It's about seeing the paths forward, the ways through impossible situations. It's about recognizing when the old laws are broken and what new laws might heal them. He reached into a pouch at his side and withdrew something wrapped in soft leather. When he opened it, Alara's breath caught. It was a pendant, a crescent moon wrought in silver, and at its center, a drop of deep red stone that looked almost like frozen blood. This was my mother's, Kieran said. She was also a woman of strange gifts. A seer, the old songs called her. She foresaw that one day a king would be cursed, and that the cure would come wearing the face of an exiled healer. He held the pendant out to her. She made this as a marker, a symbol that when the pathways crossed, we would recognize each other. Alara took the pendant with trembling hands. The moment her skin touched the silver, the world opened. She saw Kieran as he truly was, not just a man, not just a wolf, but a convergence of ancient powers, a king who had walked the earth for centuries, bearing the weight of every choice, every mercy, every moment of mercy he'd granted in a world that demanded cruelty. She saw the curse not as punishment, but as catalyst, a forced reckoning with his own capacity for compassion. And she saw herself through his eyes, not broken, not exiled, but exactly what was needed. A pathfinder, a healer, a woman who had learned to love what the world feared. Kieran, she whispered. I know, he said softly. I feel it too. The fire crackled, and for a moment the world held its breath. Where are you taking me? She asked. To the northern kingdom, to the fortress of Frostholm, where your gift can be studied, honored, and protected. He paused. To the place where I was born before the curse, and perhaps, if you choose, to a new beginning. Alara closed her fingers around the pendant, feeling its warmth pulse against her palm like a second heartbeat. I have a question for those of you watching from the darkness, she said to the universe, to the stars, to the listening night. Tell us where in the world you're watching from and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they find you. The wind answered, carrying the scent of pine and promises yet to be kept. Frostholm rose from the mountain like a prayer carved in ice and stone. Alara saw it first at dawn, the fortress emerging from the pre-dawn mist as though it had been waiting for them specifically, as though it had been dreaming of their arrival. The walls were constructed from a stone that held the color of winter itself, pale as bone, shot through with veins of silver that caught the first light of morning and threw it back toward the sky. Towers stretched impossibly high, their spires wrapped in banners that looked woven from starlight. And above the great gate hung a symbol that made Alara's breath catch, a crescent moon with a drop of blood suspended at its center. Kieran's pendant's twin, magnified 1,000 times, wrought in iron and ancient magic. "Welcome home," Kieran said, and she heard something in his voice that hadn't been there before. A weariness lifting, a weight being set down after centuries of carrying. The gates opened before they reached them, as though the fortress itself recognized its king. The courtyard was vast, paved in stones that seemed to hold the memory of every winter that had passed across their surface. Warriors stood in formation, not threatening but ceremonial, their armor polished to mirror brightness, their eyes forward. At the center of the assembled crowd stood a woman with silver hair and eyes that held the same ancient weight as Kieran's. She wore a crown of iron set with a single deep red stone, and when she saw Kieran, her stern expression cracked open with something like grief and relief combined. "My son," she said, descending the steps from the throne that sat elevated above the courtyard. "My mother." Alara understood. The Queen of the North, the one whose blood had crafted the pendant now burning warm against her chest. Kieran dismounted and knelt before her, and the sight was so unexpected that Alara felt tears prick her eyes. Here was this man of power and terrible grace, this king who commanded armies and saw into souls, bowing before his mother like a child seeking absolution. "I am returned," he said, "and I am freed." The queen touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw as though verifying that he was truly there, truly present, truly hers again. When she looked up at Alara, her eyes narrowed with recognition. "You," she said, not a question. Alara slipped from her horse and moved forward, unsure of the protocol for meeting a queen, but guided by the same instinct that had drawn her to shelter Kieran, that had led her north without hesitation. The Pathfinder gift was singing now, singing with such intensity that she could barely contain it. "Your mother made a pendant," Alara said quietly, a marker for the moment when the paths would cross. The queen's expression shifted. "You carry her gift." "I do. I'm a Pathfinder. I see the truth in souls, and I see the roads forward." Alara reached beneath her tunic and drew out the pendant Kieran had given her. "I see that your curse was born from mercy, and that mercy is what broke it. I see that your son refused to become the kind of king your council demanded, and that refusing is what made him worthy of the crown." The queen studied her for a long moment. Then she gestured to the guards, who began to disperse the formal gathering. The courtyard gradually emptied, leaving only the queen, Kieran, and Alara standing in the pale morning light. "Come," the queen said. "There is much to tell, and the fortress has been waiting a long time for a Pathfinder's return." They were led through corridors of stone that seemed to breathe, to pulse with an awareness that was not quite alive and not quite dead. The walls were covered in symbols, runes and languages Alara didn't recognize, but which her gift could somehow read anyway. They were maps, she realized. Maps of the roads between worlds, the pathways that only the Pathfinders could navigate. The queen led them to a chamber deep within the fortress, where a great library opened up like a second sky. The books here were bound in leather that shimmered with subtle magic, and the shelves stretched up into a darkness that seemed to contain more space than the chamber itself should have held. "This is the archive of Frostholm," the queen said. "Every Pathfinder who has walked this earth has left something here, a record of the roads they walked, the truths they discovered, the lives they changed by simply choosing to see." She moved through the stacks with the confidence of someone who had walked these corridors 1,000 times. "My mother was a Pathfinder, and hers before her. For 5 generations we have carried this gift in the blood of the royal house." "Why did you stop?" Alara asked. "We didn't stop," the queen said, pulling a volume from the shelf that seemed to glow with an inner light. The world stopped believing in us. The Southern Territories decided that the gift was dangerous, that seeing truly was a violation, that mercy was weakness. She turned to face Ilara. So they hunted us. They burned our libraries, exiled our healers, and eventually, there was only silence. She opened the book, and its pages seemed to contain not words, but pure information, images and sensations and understanding that flowed directly into Ilara's mind when she looked at them. She saw generations of pathfinders walking roads of starlight and shadow. She saw them healing kings and paupers alike, refusing to take sides in wars, insisting on the truth even when the truth was painful. "And my mother?" Kieran asked. There was something in his voice that suggested he already knew the answer, but needed to hear it spoken aloud. "She foresaw your curse," the queen said. "She saw that you would choose mercy, and that mercy would become your undoing. But she also saw what came after, the healer who would come out of exile, bearing gifts that matched your own." The queen looked at Ilara. "She saw you, child. Decades before you were born, she saw your face in the roads of tomorrow." Ilara felt something shift inside her, a sense of purpose clicking into place, a pattern recognizing itself as complete. "What do you want from me?" she asked. "Nothing," the queen said. "Everything. Your gift has atrophied in the south, used only for survival and secrecy. Here, in Frostholm, you can learn what it truly means to be a pathfinder. You can walk roads that your ancestors walked. You can heal not just individuals, but entire bloodlines, entire territories." She paused, "But only if you choose to." Kieran took Ilara's hand. "My mother offers this not as a command, but as an invitation. The fortress is yours, if you want it. The archive is yours. The roads are yours." "And you?" Ilara asked, turning to him. "I walk where you walk," he said simply. "That is what my mother foresaw. That is what the pendant promises. I was cursed to learn mercy. You were exiled to teach it. Together, we map the roads forward." The fortress seemed to pulse with recognition, as though the very stones were acknowledging that a long-awaited prophecy was finally being fulfilled. The archive became Ilara's world. Days, or what felt like days in the timeless space of Frostholm's library, were spent learning to consciously use her Pathfinder gift in ways she'd never imagined possible. Her mother had taught her basics: how to sense the true nature of a person's heart, how to heal through touch, how to see the lies that people told themselves and others. But this was different. This was systematic, ancient, vast in its scope. Under the tutelage of the queen herself, who revealed that her name was Morgana, a name that carried the weight of legend, Ilara learned to do things that seemed impossible. She could project her consciousness down the pathways between people, seeing the connections that bound them, the ruptures that divided them. She could walk the roads between sleeping minds and touch people's deepest truths without their conscious awareness. She could heal not just physical wounds, but spiritual ones, the kind that festered for centuries in a bloodline's core. Kieran was often there in the archive, watching her work, occasionally asking questions, but mostly just witnessing the transformation. Ilara could feel his presence like a constant warmth at the edge of her awareness, comforting and steady. "You're changing," he said one evening, as they walked through the fortress corridors toward the tower where Ilara had been given chambers. "Every day, your gift grows deeper, stronger." "It's like I was living in shadow my entire life," Ilara said, "and now I'm finally learning to stand in the light." She paused at a window that looked out over the northern territories, endless mountains and forests, all dusted with the first snow of deep winter. "But I can feel something else, too. A gathering. Something dark approaching from the south." Kieran's jaw tightened. "The council discovered that I've returned. They've sent messengers, threats. They claim that I was cursed for good reason, that the curse should not have been broken, that your presence here is an abomination." "What do you want to do?" Alara asked. "I don't know yet," Kieran admitted. "For 5 years, I was a wolf, removed from the burden of choice. Now I'm being forced to choose again, and the weight of it—" He turned away. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to choose mercy again. Not when mercy is what got me cursed in the first place." Alara moved close to him, close enough that she could reach out and touch his face. Her Pathfinder's sight expanded in response, flowing down into his blood, his bone, the deepest chambers of his heart. And there she found the real wound, not the curse, but the guilt beneath it. The belief that his mercy had been weakness, that his refusal to kill had endangered his people. "Show me," she whispered. The vision came instantly. She was standing in the throne room of the southern fortress, watching Kieran kneel before his council. A young woman was brought in chains, dark-haired, defiant, marked for death for the crime of resistance. She was not a traitor. She was not a threat. She was simply someone who had refused to bow to a conqueror. Kieran looked at her, and in that moment, something broke open inside him. He saw himself in her, saw the way that mercy and strength were not opposites, but mirrors of each other. "I will not execute her," he'd said. And the council had risen as one, and Kieran had felt the spell take hold of his blood, transforming him, binding him into wolf form as punishment for his refusal. But there was more to the vision. Alara saw what came after the curse. She saw the young woman escaped, saw her building a life in the territories beyond the council's reach, saw her teaching others about the king who had chosen her life over his throne. She saw the ripples of that single choice moving forward through time, destabilizing the council's power, creating space for something new to grow. Kieran's refusal to kill had changed the world. When Alara opened her eyes, tears were streaming down her face. "Your mercy was not weakness," she said. "It was the most powerful act you could have committed. The council cursed you for it. But that young woman lived, and her life has inspired how many others? How many people have chosen a different path because you chose it first?" Kieran's arms came around her, pulling her close. "You see things I cannot see," he said into her hair. "You walk roads I cannot walk." "Not alone," she whispered. "I was always meant to walk them with you." The moment stretched between them, a threshold, a question, a promise waiting to be made. Then the fortress shook. Not gently, not subtly. The stone walls trembled, candles fell, and Alara felt it in her bones. Something massive, something dark, something furious was moving toward Frostholm with inexorable purpose. They ran to the tower's highest point, and from there they could see it. A storm approaching from the south, moving against the wind itself, defying the laws of nature. And at its heart, riding a horse that seemed to be made of shadow, was the Alpha of the Southern Council. His name was Aldrich, and he carried power of a different kind, not magical like Kieran's, but political, backed by armies and centuries of unquestioned authority. "So," Morgana's voice said behind them, calm as stone, "the reckoning comes sooner than I foresaw." "Mother," Kieran began, but she raised a hand. "Your choice is clear," she said, looking between Kieran and Alara. "You can fight, and many will die. You can hide, and the South will hunt you into the deep places of the world, or—" She paused, her ancient eyes looking directly at Alara. "You can walk the roads. You can go into their hearts and show them the truth they've been refusing to see." Alara understood what she was being asked to do. That would require the cooperation of everyone they love. "Yes," Morgana said, "everyone they've ever refused to see clearly." The ritual took place in the deepest chamber of the archive, where the walls themselves seemed to be made of crystallized starlight. Alara stood at the center of a circle drawn in powdered silver, and around her stood a dozen pathfinders, not living ones, but echoes, the recorded essence of generations of healers who had walked roads between worlds. Kieran stood at the threshold, unable to enter, unable to protect her, only able to witness. "I'm going to show them the truth," Alara said, and her voice sounded strange to her own ears, layered with echoes, resonant with power she'd only just learned to command. "I'm going to walk the roads between the council members and the people they love, and I'm going to show them what they've refused to see all these years. You'll be vulnerable," Morgana warned. "Your body will be defenseless. If they discover what you're doing, then you'll have to protect it," Alara said simply. "That's the only price of this working." She closed her eyes and let her consciousness expand outward, stretching like roots through the earth, following the pathways that connected the southern territories to Frostholm. She found them first, the council members, sitting in their fortress, confident in their authority, assured of their righteousness. And one by one, she walked into their dreams. She showed Aldrich the face of the young woman he'd ordered Kieran to execute, showed him her as she was now, alive and whole and happy, building a life in peace. She showed him the family she'd saved by choosing nonviolence, the ripples of mercy spreading outward through generations. She showed the other council members their own buried gifts, the pathfinders in their bloodlines that they'd hunted to extinction. She showed them what that cost had been, the loss of wisdom, the death of balance, the way that fear had consumed their entire civilization. And finally, she showed them all something deeper, a vision of a world where pathfinders walked openly, where healers were honored, where the gift of sight was prized instead of feared. A world that could only come into being if they chose to release their grip on power, if they chose mercy over dominance. It took everything she had. Alara felt her consciousness begin to splinter under the strain, felt herself starting to lose cohesion in the vast network of roads she'd traveled. But then, a presence. Kieran's presence, impossibly strong, impossibly clear. He was walking beside her in the spirit roads, his hand finding hers in the darkness, his power lending her strength when her own reserves were depleted. "You are not alone," he said, and his voice carried the command of kings and the gentleness of lovers. "I walk where you walk." Together, they brought the final truth back to the council. Kieran had not been cursed for weakness, but for strength. He had chosen mercy, and that choice had transformed everything it touched. Alara returned to her body gasping, feeling as though she'd been shattered and reassembled. Kieran was there. He'd broken the barrier of the ritual circle, cradling her in his arms. "They saw," she whispered. "They saw," he confirmed. And then they waited. The answer came not in hours, but in days. The storm from the south dissolved, pulled back by forces beyond its control. And in its place came a delegation. Aldrich himself, walking forward under a flag of truce, his armor removed, his bearing no longer imperious. "The council wishes to treat," he said simply. "We have reconsidered. The roads you walked, the truths you showed, we cannot unsee them." Kieran helped Alara to her feet. She felt hollow, wrung out, but also somehow deeper, as though she'd learned something essential about the nature of transformation and choice. "Then let us build something new," Kieran said, and he extended his hand to Aldrich. "Not as enemies, but as guides. Let the pathfinders walk openly again. Let the gift be honored. Let mercy have a seat at the table of power." Aldrich took his hand, and in the courtyard of Frostholm, watched by Morgana and the echoes of ancient pathfinders, a new age was born. Winter deepened over the following weeks, and with it came a strange kind of peace. Alara moved through Frostholm like a ghost, present but diminished. The ritual of walking the roads had taken something from her. Not her gift, but something essential beneath the gift. Kieran noticed it in how her eyes seemed to be looking at something just beyond the veil of the visible world. He noticed it in how her hand had begun to tremble when she reached for things, as though her body was losing its grip on the material realm. "Tell me the truth," he said one night as they stood on the tower overlooking the frozen kingdom. What did the ritual cost you? Ilara was silent for a long time. The roads I walked, she finally said. The pathways between the council members and their loved ones, they all pass through me now. I can feel them constantly, like 1,000 conversations happening at once at the edge of my hearing. She turned to him. I've become a fulcrum, a balance point. That can't, Kieran began, but she held up a hand. I knew it would happen, she said quietly. The older pathfinders in the archive, the ones whose essence remains in the library, they showed me. Whoever walks the roads for others has to carry the weight of those roads in their own blood. I'm holding space for the connection now, so others don't have to. So you're dying, Kieran said, and his voice was flat, hollow. No, transforming. It's different. She looked at him. I'm becoming something else. Something that exists partially in the spirit roads, partially here. It's not death, Kieran. It's evolution. I won't accept that, he said fiercely. Not after everything. Not after we just... He reached for her, but she stepped back, and her form wavered for just a moment, becoming translucent. There's a choice, she said. Morgana offered it to me. But I wanted to wait until you knew the situation. Ilara took a breath. I could anchor myself completely to the material world. It would require a permanent binding, a blood ritual, what the old pathfinders called the bonding of souls. It would lock us together, you and me. Our fates would become one. Then we'd do it, Kieran said immediately. You need to understand what that means, Ilara said. If you bind with me, your life becomes tied to mine. If I fall, you fall. If I die, you die with me. It's not a romantic gesture, Kieran. It's a risk. I've already lost you once, Kieran said, when you healed me in that burning cabin. I walked the roads of tomorrow without you, and every version was hollow. Every future was empty. He moved close, and this time she didn't step away. Bind with me. Let me hold you in the material world. Let me be your anchor. You understand? Ilara asked, searching his face. This is forever. Yes, Kieran said. Forever. With you. That's the choice I make. The ritual took place in the deepest chamber of the archive, but this time Morgana herself wove the spell. She drew the circle in blood, Kieran's blood and Ilara's, mingled, commingled, becoming one. She spoke words in a language older than stone, older than mountains, words that seemed to reshape the very fabric of reality. And as she spoke, Kieran and Ilara felt the change. It was gentle, like sinking into warm water. Their essences began to merge, their boundaries becoming permeable. Kieran could feel the roads inside her blood, could sense the weight she carried. And Ilara could feel his strength, his centuries of power, his absolute commitment to protecting what was his. When the ritual ended, they were still themselves, but they were also something new. A dyad, a partnership written into their blood and bone. It's done, Morgana said, and there was something like approval in her ancient eyes. You are bound, for better or worse, until the end of time. Ilara felt herself solidifying, becoming more present in the material world. The trembling in her hands stopped, the translucence faded, but she could still feel the roads inside her, still sense the vast network of pathfinders and futures and choices that stretched across the world. She also felt Kieran there with her, walking those roads, forever beside her. Subscribe, she found herself saying, as though the words came from both of them simultaneously. If you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the fortress, in rooms and cars and quiet spaces, thousands of hearts answered the call. The roads were opening, spreading, carrying the message forward into a world that desperately needed to remember what it meant to see truly, to choose mercy, to believe in redemption. A year had passed since the binding. The world had changed in ways both subtle and profound. The Pathfinders walked openly now, their gift honored across territories that had once hunted them. The Southern Council had been dissolved, replaced with a council of equals that included Pathfinders as voice and guide. Kieran ruled not as a tyrant, but as a guardian, consulted, respected, but ultimately deferential to the wisdom of the collective. And Ilara had become something the world had almost forgotten it needed. She was the bridge, they called her now, the woman who had walked into the hearts of enemies and shown them the truth, the Pathfinder whose gift had remade empires. It was on a quiet winter evening that she discovered she was pregnant. She told Kieran in the tower overlooking the frozen kingdom, the same place where she'd revealed the cost of the ritual. "A child," he said, and wonder transformed his face. "Our child, born of the binding of souls." "Born from mercy and choice," Ilara said, "born into a world that's learning to see again." Kieran wrapped her in his arms, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Ilara simply let herself rest, let herself exist in the moment, without the weight of futures or roads or prophecies. But in the archive, far below, something began to stir. An ancient text opened of its own accord, a prophecy written centuries ago by a Pathfinder who had seen forward through time. "When the bridge is with child," it read, "and the frozen rose blooms in winter's heart, the roads will open in ways they have never opened, and those who walk them will be forever changed." For the gift passes now into the 4th generation, and with it comes power that even the goddess herself cannot predict. In the courtyard of Frostholm, where nothing had ever grown but stone and snow, a single rose began to push through the frozen ground. It was white as winter starlight, with petals that seemed to contain their own inner light, and at its heart, a drop of blood-red sap that gleamed like fire. Kieran led Ilara down to see it, and as they stood before the impossible flower, she felt the full weight of what the future might hold. Their child would inherit a gift greater than any single Pathfinder's, a gift born from the binding of souls, from mercy and choice, from two people who had refused to accept the world as it was handed to them. "What is our child's destiny?" Kieran asked the rose, as though it could answer. Ilara closed her eyes and walked the roads. Not the roads of other people, but the roads of tomorrow. She saw her child grown, saw the gift flowering in ways both beautiful and terrible. She saw the world transformed again, remade by someone who had been born from love instead of duty, from choice instead of curse. She saw mercy becoming the foundation of the world. "I don't know yet," she whispered, "but the roads are open. The future is being written, and we will walk it together, the 3 of us." Kieran took her hand, and the frozen rose bloomed deeper, its petals opening like a heart finally learning to beat freely. The wind carried the story forward, carried it into the darkness where listeners waited, where hearts beat in synchronization with the rhythm of this tale. And those hearts understood what it meant to be burned for mercy, what it meant to shelter the hunted, what it meant to choose love when the world demanded cruelty. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive. Every witness to mercy adds light to the darkness. Every person who believes in transformation becomes part of the story. And the story, the endless, infinite story, continues to unfold in the starlight and shadow of Frostholm, where a king and his healer wait for their child to be born, ready to teach them a truth that the world had forgotten, but is finally, slowly, learning to remember again. Mercy is not weakness. It is the most powerful magic of all. The frozen rose blooms. The roads remain open. And somewhere north of the world you know, the Pathfinders walk on, forever changing the map of what's possible.